everyone, welcome to today's video. As you can see from the title, we are going to be talking about every makeup tip I've ever learned. Now, I do need to caveat this a little bit. These are not going to be like every makeup tip and hack and everything that I've ever heard of. They're going to be tips that I use on a daily basis. So each step, I'm going to be basically telling you all of the tips that I know and use for that step. And I'm also going to be telling you who I learned it from. However, I am not going to be telling you where I learned it from, partially because some of these are so old in my brain that I don't even remember. And then also I don't know if a lot of the locations will still even be there. So I'm just telling you the people that I learned it from to try to give credit to them for like being the first place that I heard it. Furthermore, I am not going to be telling you which products I'm using, mostly because this isn't a product recommendation video, and also because, like I said, your needs are different than my needs, and this video is going to be heckin' long as it is, so it's just not necessary. I am, however, going to be telling you which tools I'm using because I think that those directly influence the application of the products. But with the tools and the products, like I said, you don't have to use the ones that I'm using. If you just don't feel like it, don't use it. You do you. You know, there's no rules here. You know, do what you think is best for you and we'll all be friends. So the purpose for this video is not really to get any kind of hype or anything like that. It is just to be informational, educational, and I'm going to try to explain to you why I am doing the things that I'm doing. That was something that I really needed when I was first starting out. It was like, okay, yeah, you can tell me the tips and like I'll follow them, but if I don't understand why, then it doesn't really help me. And so I'm really trying to explain to you like why I'm doing these things. I'm going to do one part, today's video, as just like a base and lips kind of thing. And then I'm going to do a separate video for eyeshadow because that can take a long time in and of itself. And also some people just aren't interested in that. They just want to throw some bronzer in the crease and go. And that is totally okay. So I'm going to be walking you through those two separately. Now, I have noticed recently on the internet that the people who don't know what they're doing are the ones who talk too much. So I'm going to pretend that I know what I'm doing and stop talking so much. So there are buttons down below. Y'all know what to do with them. And we're going to go ahead and do it. So the first step of any makeup anything is to prep the skin. And the first thing that you want to do is cleanse the skin. I think that was a tip that I learned from Kandee Johnson. I just seem to remember her small little voice in my head saying something about not putting makeup on top of bacteria. You want to be putting makeup onto clean skin so that you don't cause a bigger problem than is already there. Also, you want to go ahead and moisturize the skin before you do your makeup as well, because if you are just putting on makeup, you will never be able to put on enough to fake good skin. Take care of your skin and your body first and then make it pretty. The second step that I'm going to use is to curl my eyelashes. Now, I learned this from a course that I just took through Expert Rating, and they had a makeup artist named Megan Vigil on there, and she says that she does the curling as early as possible into the makeup so that you don't spend a long time on your eyes irritating them one step after another. So she said she likes to space it out. That way if your eyes want to get watery, they can do that before you even start putting on any makeup. When it comes to how to curl the lashes, I learned that from a girl on YouTube. Her name is MirellaBelleBeauty. So basically what I'm doing is I am curling at the base first, and then I'm kind of like pumping it as I go up the lashes, and I just continually angle my curlers back. That way my lashes curl further and higher than they would have before. It doesn't look like that big of a difference, but if you were to put on your mascara with uncurled lashes and then your mascara with curled lashes, then it would look like a huge difference. The next step is to put on lip balm and let it sink in, and I learned this from Allie Glines and Allana Davison, I think, also does this. And then once I get to my lips, I can wipe it off and put on my lip products, and I have nicely moisturized lips. Now we are coming on to primer. So especially with pore filling primers, I go ahead and I push them into the skin, kind of like you're like spackling a wall. I learned this tip from Tati Westbrook. She uses it all the time. And especially with like pore filling products, they tend to be a little bit thicker, more pasty, more like silicone based, and so they have a tendency to sit on your skin and look really heavy and cakey, unless you really push it in, and then you'll get that pore filling effect from it. With foundation, there's a lot of tips. We're gonna shake up the foundation, that way it gets mixed together. I think I learned that from Laura Lee. So there's a few different strategies that we're going to be using kind of all at once. This is just kind of what I think about as I'm putting in my foundation. So the first thing is that you want to use the least amount of product as possible. So I learned that it is okay to let your skin kind of shine through and use only what is needed. And I learned that from Eldridge. And then I learned from Bobbi Brown the same thing, that you really want to use the least amount of product and just really work it into the skin. And I was able to see that in action through Raw Beauty Christie's video, where she tried to mimic actress makeup, that kind of like no makeup thing, and that was just a really good example of what it looks like as opposed to just slapping it on top. And then Riche Loves also said to use light layers and really like push it into the skin, that way you're kind of filling in pores with your foundation as well, not just your primer. And I thought that that was just brilliant. So I'm gonna start out with a brush, and this is from Eco Tools, and this is their classic foundation brush. The reason why I'm using a flat brush is literally because Bobbi Brown said to in her book. That's the only reason. So I'm just starting on like the reddest areas where I actually like really need coverage, and then I'm just kind of going from there. So I used only one pump. I'm probably not even going to use all of it. And I'm also starting with a brush because brushes give you more coverage than sponges. So really a brush is for the coverage and then a sponge is for the finish. I'm going to be using a sponge after this to get the finish that I want, and I first saw that on Allie Glines' channel. And you'll see I'm working like downwards, and the reason is because that is the direction that the peach fuzz on your face grows, and so up here it kind of grows upward and then it kind of goes in like a fountain shape and grows down. If you go against it, it can make it stand up, and that'll give you a very, you know, Marilyn Monroe halo around your face, but it only looks good in black and white photographs on film. So I just kind of like work that into the skin really good just to get like an even layer over most of my face. It does look pretty streaky, so now I'm going to use my sponge. I decided to zoom y'all in so that you can start seeing details. So I'm using my sponge now, and I am just patting down and getting that even, flawless finish. And the reason why I'm using this Urban Decay one is because I like that kind of squishy finish. I don't like a gel type feeling like memory foam where like it takes forever to expand back up. I also don't like a hard feeling like a marshmallow where you can't like squish it down really easily. I like somewhere in the middle. Now I am going to use whatever is left over on my sponge, and I am going to go over my nose for just the smallest amount of coverage. This is a tip that I learned from Cosmo by Haley. And what that does is it keeps your nose from being like really cakey looking, because you can kind of cake it on your cheeks and fake it a little bit on pretty much any area of your face. But when you start doing that to your nose, because it's so prominent, I feel like people see that more. And also because your nose, typically it looks a little bit smoother and a little bit shinier than the rest of your face. So letting it just be a little bit shinier, I think is a lot more natural looking than like super trying to mattify it down, you know what I mean? And then I am also using what's left on my sponge, and I am blending the foundation down my neck. This is a tip that I learned from Laura Lee. If you take one thing from this video, start blending your foundation down your neck. Because most of us are not makeup artists, we don't have the perfect match for our face. And if you don't blend it, then you just wind up with this, what is called the foundation beard. And it winds up looking like you're wearing a mask of makeup. And it shows the most when you're outside, and nobody does their makeup outside, so nobody knows till they get outside. So just give yourself a little bit of extra breathing room, a little extra space, and just blend it on your jaw. And make sure to like drag it just a little bit down your neck and make it into a gradient that goes into your face. We're not really going for natural, we're going for believable. I didn't even use like half of the foundation that I had on my hand. If you're looking to save some product, this might be a good technique for you. Use less. Now we are moving on to concealer. I have a couple of breakouts because I've been using expired products in an attempt to use them up. I don't know why I do this to myself. So we are going to start out with our concealer, and I'm just going to put a little dot on the back of my hand, and that should be all that I need for my entire face, and probably also for my under eyes as well. So Tati Westbrook said in one of her videos that you want to use a concealer that is closer to your foundation than the concealer that you use to brighten under your eyes. The reason for that is if you use a light concealer on a blemish, light kind of attracts attention and makes it look like stuff is coming forward, and that's the opposite of what you want to do with a bump on your face. You want to make it look like it is receding, and so you want to use a little bit darker of a concealer. The second thing is that you want to use as little concealer as possible, and the reason for that is because if you use too much and then you are trying to blend it out to here, it's going to look very, very obvious, and that's the opposite of what we want to do. We don't want anything to look obvious when we're doing concealer. So she said to use the tiniest possible brush that you can. I found this E.L.F. angled eyeliner brush. It is literally so small, and I'm just going to dip the very, very ends of it, and then I'm just going to dot on those couple of places, making the tiniest dots possible so that I have less to blend out. Just kind of stippling. And the reason why I'm using a brush is, again, it has more coverage than a sponge. So I'm going to use this double-sided EcoTools brush. It has an airbrush brush on one side and a detail brush on the other. And I'm just going to use that to tap out that concealer a little bit. Next, I am going to go ahead and go for my under eyes. I don't have super dark under eye circles, but I notice them, and so I really like to go for like the most coverage that I can. And the best way to cancel out darkness under your eyes without adding a ton of layers and getting like that cakey effect is to use a color corrector. I learned that from those expert rating videos with Vigil. So I'm just going to go in with my color corrector, and this is kind of like an orangey salmony tone. It's probably a bit dark for me, but I'm going to use it still. But what a color corrector does is it essentially cancels out the coolness of your under eyes and brings a little bit of warmth back to that area. So even if it looks a little reddish, that's kind of what I want from this. I would also recommend Alex and Nell's videos on how to cover up dark circles. She has a lot of expertise on the subject. Okay, so I am just blending this out, and I'm not blending it outside of the dark circle area. I'm keeping it on my dark circle so that it doesn't give a weird effect to the rest of my skin, because the rest of my skin doesn't need that color corrector. So I'm going to use that same detail end of this EcoTools sponge and grab a tiny amount of concealer. You want to use the smallest amount possible so it doesn't look cakey. And I'm going to apply a little bit on the inner corner, just there on the places with the most darkness. And that was a tip that I learned from Bobbi Brown's book. And then I'm also going to apply a tiny amount to the outer corner, because a lot of people tend to have darkness but not think about it out there. And this gives kind of an instant eye lift, and I learned that from Wayne Goss. Now, if you are using a concealer that doesn't have a ton of coverage, you can leave it for a little bit and let it almost like dry out and thicken up to give it a tiny bit more coverage. That is what Jackie Aina does with like all of her concealers. So now I am just going to use a flat-ish little brush. This is also from EcoTools, and this is their Correct brush. And I'm just patting it out, getting an even amount of coverage. If you have a bag, what you want to do is you want to conceal under the bag. If you add a little bit of lightness underneath it, it's going to cancel out the shadow that the bag is casting, and it's going to make it look like it's a little bit flatter. It's going to give that optical illusion that it's not tucking under as much as it is. So I am just gently tapping this out with my brush, and then I'm going to use my finger and I'm going to blend it out with the warmth of my finger. Bobbi Brown says to do this, as well as Robert Welsh. When I tap it with my fingers, I'm also tapping out any creases so that when I set it with powder, it doesn't set the creases in place, it sets the smoothness in place, if that makes sense. Okay, so basically no under eye circles anymore. So now I'm going to grab just a little tiny bit of powder on the end of my sponge, and I'm almost going to bake a little bit, but I'm literally concentrating this only on my under eye creases. This is a step that I learned from Julia Adams, MUA. So we are just getting the creases, the little crinkles. And then I'm also grabbing what is left in the lid, and I'm going to press that on the creases of my forehead because I have a tendency to wrinkle there. One really great tip for filling in your pores after you've put on your foundation is to use your powder. And basically you're just going to like press it into the areas that have pores. And then you can come back with a fluffy brush afterwards and blend out any excess powder that you have sitting on top. And I learned to press it into the pores from Wayne Goss, and I learned to do that using a sponge from Nakia Joy. I'm also going to do that for my nose because my nose has a tendency to get a little bit oily and it has a tendency to be quite porous. And then I'm using a setting brush from Real Techniques to just sweep away any excess from my under eyes and any other areas that I just powdered. Now we are moving on to the brows. I think that how you do your brows starts with how you let them grow or how you trim them. So we've all seen the whole like start at the nostril, go through the eye, and then, go to the corner of the eye. I no longer follow that. It really just depends on your face's needs. So because my eyes are deep set, I need whatever lid space I can get. And so I decided a couple of weeks ago that I was going to trim off the outer tail of my brow. And I learned this from Jamie Page. She tried the Foxy Eyes trend that's going around right now. And it looked so great on her. It gave her so much more lid space. And I was like, and then I noticed that a lot of people who have a ton of lid space and who do like these crazy eye looks, that's the kind of brow they have, is this much straighter brow. And so that's kind of what I've been going for, is one that comes further out here rather than coming down here and cutting off all of this space. Another thing that I've been doing is instead of trimming my brow to where my nostril is, I've been trimming it to where my bulb of my nose starts. And that gives you just a couple of more millimeters of space for them to grow a little bit further together and let your nose look a little bit slimmer. So if you have a very narrow, very cinched face, you might want to start trimming them to the outside of your nostril. And if you have a very wide face, you might want to start letting them grow just a little bit further inwards. That was a tip that I gained from Wayne Goss. When it comes to the arch, I really don't worry about it. I'm gonna be honest. I just kind of don't like it to grow very far down because, again, I need my lid space. So there are a ton of products that you can use to fill in your brows. I typically tend to stick to gel and a pencil. And so you can either do your pencil first and your gel later, or if you don't want to get your gel dirty, you can do it the opposite way. So I'm going to show you kind of like the techniques that I use for either one because I switch back and forth, to be honest. So when it comes to filling in your brows first, I use the Lisa Eldridge tip of brushing your hairs upwards and then brushing them downwards. And you fill them in when they're brushed downwards, and that just allows you to see where your little bald spots actually are. And then when you brush them back in the direction of your hair growth, it looks a lot more natural and it looks a lot more evenly filled in rather than like trying to finagle it in between these little parts and rivers of hair. So you do want to try to fill in the direction of your hair though. And that was something that I learned from Wayne Goss. A lot of people try to brush like directly upwards and it just doesn't look natural. It doesn't look right. And so what you want to do is you want to pay attention to the direction that your hairs are actually growing. So your brow hairs tend to grow upwards in the front, kind of more diagonally as they get to the sides, and then almost sideways or even downwards as they get to the tail of your brow, if you have in fact chosen to preserve the tail of your brow. But what I like to do now is I like to put in a ton of gel because I have these little straight brows now. I want to make sure that not a hair is out of place. I've just been really liking how like a really crisp, clean brow looks. And so I've really been like working the gel in and then I will brush it. And that's so that I can make sure that I get the entire hair coated with gel, and then I'll kind of brush it and sculpt it and shape it, and then I'll fill it in. And the reason why I do the gel first is so that I don't scrub away all of the pencil that I use. And typically I'll move on to another step or two before I continue with my brows so that the gel can kind of dry down. I just forgot to do this earlier in my routine, and also I thought it made more sense grouping all the brow stuff together. So I am going to go and just kind of wait on this to dry down for 3 minutes or so, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now it is time to fill in my brows. I'm just using a small pencil. The reason why I don't go for a lot of curves and everything in my brows is because that is not really how my brows grow naturally, and also because I want to avoid what is, in my opinion, the worst brow shape ever invented, the sperm brows. So what I'm talking about is like this round tip up here and then a teeny weeny little tail back here. It kind of gives the brows almost like a, I don't think it flatters anybody or anybody's eye shape, anybody's face shape, nothing. So I kind of like a brow that's a little bit thicker, a tiny bit more masculine. You can go for a brow that is a little more Julia Roberts, you know, that's kind of the same shape but a little bit thinner, whatever you want to do. So I'm just going to fill in underneath until it's straight-ish, like just a smooth curve. I'm not going for like this kind of thing. And then I like to take it up on top of the brow and just literally only using the weight of my pencil, barely touching the tip, and I'm just filling in on the top and the bottom, kind of a line there. And literally it's just until I can see it. And then I am flicking in these little comet tails, little hair-like strokes upwards. And the reason why I'm doing that is so it looks more natural. You can kind of fake it in here and make it a little bit thicker towards the end of your brow. But once you get to the front, it starts to become real obvious because typically the front of your brow is a little more sparse than the tail. And then for the tail, because I don't have like a, super defined end, it ends a little bit bluntly right now. I just like to kind of extend it a little bit and then I just join it from the top. If you ever need to check, you just frown a little bit. I've also gotten to where I enjoy setting my brows with powder. I find it makes them last a little bit longer, especially because I'm kind of faking the tail of my brow with a cream product. So I just take a cool tone powder and an angled brush, and I just kind of tap it in right on top of where I just put that pencil. I can also fill in with this if I ever want to. I also forgot to mention that another reason why I like kind of a more angular brow shape is because it is a lot easier to get straight lines even and to see if they're even or not than it is to try to mimic an exact curve and contour from one side to the other. So if you are wanting to change your brow shape, I would say that you can practice right before you hop in the shower or right before you're about to wash your face. That way you don't have to go out in front of anybody with it. Or, just stay home for months on end. So now I am going to carve out my brows a little bit. This is a hint that I learned from Juicy Jazz, and she carves out her brows every single day. I just like to carve out a little tiny bit, so I'm just drawing some concealer underneath my brow and then blending it out. This not only helps to lift the brow just a little bit, but it also helps to cover up if you have any eyebrow stubble that you're missing, or say you drew outside of the lines like I tend to do, then this helps to cover all that up and help it look a little bit cleaner. So just be sure to blend those edges in so that you can't see a line. Use a very, very small amount, very small. And I really like this dual-sided brush from EcoTools to do that because this little flat side almost has like a pencil point on it, and so you can get really close to the brow. And then this little airbrush side is very great for blending it out and making it look nice and soft. Now we are moving on to bronzer / contour. I do bad and I don't use a contour powder. I use my bronzer for my contouring because I don't go crazy enough that it looks unnatural. That is one of the biggest warnings that I think I can give you, is just don't overdo it because it can make your face look dirty. That is something that Bobbi Brown says. She doesn't even do any contouring on the face whatsoever. I'm going to be using two different bronzers, a matte one for contouring since matte products absorb light and make stuff look like it is receding. And I'm going to be using a glowy bronzer for sort of rounding and warming up the face because glowier products reflect light and make it look like stuff is coming forward. So the places I want to recede, use a matte product. The places I want to come forward, use a glowy product. And I'm going to be using this small little round kind of fluffy brush. This is from Luxie. It is their small contour brush. So I like this one because you can blend stuff really easily, but it's like smaller for blending. Okay, so I always start out with the cheeks. And I start out with a Charlotte Tilbury tip, which is follow the hollow, darling. So I'm going to follow the hollow of my cheekbone. So if you just like do that, or even while you're talking, you can kind of see it. I'm going to follow that exact hollow right there. It kind of goes almost from the corner of your mouth to the top of your ear. And so that's where I'm going to go. You don't go too high. That is a tip that I learned from Tati because she learned it from Scott Barnes when he was on her channel. And I'm going to blend in circular motions, which I learned from Nikki Tutorials. And that helps to blend it out really, really smoothly. This side just looks a little bit more contoured than that side. I am also going to kind of, instead of going like this, I'm going to kind of come up in a higher angle like this. And that helps to kind of slim down if you have really prominent cheekbones, or if you have a diamond-shaped face or a really wide face, you want to slim it down a little bit. You kind of come up here almost on the temples a little bit. And this is one that I learned from Jamie French. That way you don't get that kind of like caveman effect. When it comes to contouring the jaw, the best tutorial I've ever seen was from Alex and Nell. She said that she comes right here where her earlobe meets her jaw, and she kind of contours that in like a 90-degree angle, and it helps it look a little bit cuter, and I definitely agree. And then she will come underneath just in a straight line and just contour that. And she kind of contours the double chin too, or she'll do this. I know it looks funny, but like it works. And then Scott Barnes says, don't do this with your head while you're doing it. You want to like keep your head pretty level. I have a bad habit of doing that thing. I don't contour my chin at all because I don't want to shorten my face. I think that my face has a tendency to be a little bit wide. I want to lengthen it as much as possible. So I just kind of leave my chin alone. Now I am going to switch to this Farrah brush. It's their 20FF Straight. And I just like to grab a little bit of product, kind of shake it off. And then I come under my lip right here, just in the middle. And I learned to contour under my lip from Sophie Louise. And then I use what's left over to kind of get my little butt chin there. And then I just kind of blend out both of those with just the edge, the corner of my brush. That way it looks natural. Looks like a shadow and not like a line. Now I am going to contour my nose, and I learned to do this from Brianna Fox. So what I'm going to do is I am going to draw on the top plane of my nose. So not the angled side, I'm going to draw on like the part that's actually reflecting light. And I'm looking to see where my nose is reflecting light. So there should be a strip of light that you see going down the center of your nose. I am just contouring on either side of it. I am not touching that strip of light. I am getting right up to the edge of it and contouring there, leaving the center completely open. I don't know if you can see that. Let me put a little bit more on so that you can. It may look crazy for a minute, but that's because I'm trying to show you. Do you see what I did? How I left like a strip open down the middle, and I kind of have these, they're not the corners, they are the sides of that strip of light down the flat part of my nose. And what that does is it gives almost this like closing effect, same as with your eyebrows being closer. You want those little pieces of contour to be a little bit closer. And you don't want to come down the side of your nose because it can make your nose look kind of like dirty. Where my bulb of my nose meets the cartilage of my nose, it kind of makes this angle. And I'm going to accentuate that angle. So I'm kind of creating these little arrows that are pointing almost downwards, but also inwards. And it just looks a little bit more natural than like drawing the lines all the way down your nose. And then I also take a little bit more on my brush and I draw on these planes that are kind of pointing upwards. So we're kind of drawing a bunch of arrows that are pointing down towards this spot on my nose is kind of what I like to think of. Going upwards here and then diagonally here. So I'm not changing the shape of my nose, I'm just accentuating the shape of my nose. So I'm not drawing somebody else's nose on my face here. I don't think that anybody should feel the pressure to like change their nose shape. I would hate for somebody to feel bad about the way their nose is shaped. You know what I mean? So do what you think looks prettiest on you. Now I'm going to come back in with that little fluffy brush that I was using for bronzer earlier. And I'm going to just blend out the edges of this. Just the tiniest amount. And you see how like that gave a little bit of structure to my nose, but it doesn't look crazy. So that is how I contour my nose on a daily basis. Now we are actually going to bring in the bronzer. And so this is a bit glowier of a product. Going to take my fluffy brush on here. And I'm just going to bring it a little bit on my forehead and kind of draw this big half circle. And the reason that I'm doing that is again so that my face looks a little more oval because I think that's the most flattering face shape. If you like a heart-shaped face, then maybe you wouldn't want to do this. You want to leave the forehead nice and wide and then contour a lot down here. If you like a wide face, you can really contour here and make your face look a little bit flatter and wider. Whatever you want to do with your face, you can do with these steps here. I would just say leave it believable and focus on looking more like you, like a better version of you, than on looking like somebody else. And the reason why I'm doing this with a glowy product rather than with a matte product is because I'm not trying to make my forehead look smaller particularly. I kind of like the shape of my forehead. I'm just kind of trying to make it look like it's nice and tan and healthy, like I've spent time in the sun. And that is what I would say a glowy bronzer is for, to make you look like you've actually been in the sun. And then I'm going to take this a little bit on the round part of my cheekbone. And then also Bobbi Brown says you can kind of color correct if you have any redness on your cheeks here. So I like to do that a little bit too. But I'm basically just giving my face like a sun-kissed effect right now. Just a tiny bit of that on my nose. And I think this gives kind of that like little rosy nose look that's going around the internet right now without looking unnatural and without looking like you had a ski mask on for the entire weekend and got crazy sunburned. Okay, so just making stuff look rounder, a little more sun-kissed, a little more, you know, alive and awake. I also want to mention with your nose contour, You also kind of want to get like right here in between your brow and your nose because it kind of continues that line and makes it look even more cinched. But that's like a non-touring. I learned that from Jackie Aina. She'll go under her brow and right there, and that's all she does for her nose. I think it looks amazing. Now we're moving on to highlighter. There are 3 places that I typically highlight on my face. That would be my cheeks, my upper lip, and my nose. So I'm gonna walk you through that. Now, the reason why I'm doing this before blush is because of Wayne Goss's Cloudburst blush technique. It allows a little bit of the glow from your highlighter to make it through to your blush. It just makes everything a little bit smoother. So this is the Luxie 514 blush brush, and the reason why I'm using a fluffier brush is because I found that when I was using a more focused one, it was kind of giving me like a strip on my face, and I don't like that effect. So yeah, that's why I use a fluffier brush now. So I'm just patting it in, and this is so I'm not like emphasizing the texture that I have on my cheeks. Powders tend to emphasize a little bit more than creams. And I'm keeping this nice and high, kind of giving the face a little bit of a lift and emphasizing the cheekbone. I don't come down here because I have a lot of texture there. I just like how it looks when I like turn my face and you can see it. Now I'm moving on to a more focused brush. This is my illuminator from Beau Gâchis, but I'm just gonna grab a little bit of that and tap it off. And then I'm going to highlight the bridge of my nose and the very, very tip. The reason why I do the bridge is again from Wayne Goss, and he just said that it looks more natural to do like kind of more between your brows rather than the entire strip of your nose. And then I just draw down that strip of light that we preserved earlier. And then I like to take a little tiny bit on the tip of my nose. And then I'm going to take a little bit on the side, and I am going to highlight my Cupid's bow. This is something that I learned from Laura Lee, was I think where I first heard it, but then I first like really saw it in action through Casey Holmes. She gives herself like a milk mustache every time she does it. It looks weird, and then you put lipstick on and then you're like, whoa. Now we are on to blush. Bobbi Brown says to use a color that is pretty much your natural blushing color, and she says to take that on pretty much the entire cheek area, and then she says to take a brighter, more concentrated pop of blush and put that like right on the apples of your cheeks. I am starting out with a matte blush again because I want it to look a little bit more natural, and also I have that highlighter on underneath and I don't want this to get out of control. So I'm just bringing this in large sweeping motions all over the cheek, and also because I have a lot of texture, I don't want to, accentuate my texture with a glowy blush. It's very, very important to like step back and look at yourself every once in a while. Otherwise you'll keep doing stuff and you're only looking at this area, and then you back up and you're like, that doesn't go with any of this. Again, I'm finishing off with a stroke that goes in the direction of my peach fuzz all over my face. And now I'm going to use this shade. It's nice and bright and glowy. So I'm just going to take a tiny amount of that on my brush, and I'm just going to dab it right in the center. And that gives the face a little more structure, because again, I want this to look like the part that is coming forward the most, all the rest of the edges of it to look like they're kind of receding and like creating that nice round shape. I also learned from Wayne Goss that you want to keep your blush kind of far away from your mouth, otherwise you can get it looking really pinched and kind of aged. You don't want to smile while you're doing your blush. You don't want to do this and then put it on, because when you put it here and then you stop smiling, it kind of moves down. So you just want to put it on when your face is relaxed. The higher you keep it, the younger you're going to look, almost like at a level with your nose, I would say. And then Kevin Kwan says to use a little bit of your blush, come on your chin and also on your forehead, on your temples. Your face naturally has the red tones throughout it in different splotches and patches, and so adding that back in, but in a very smooth way, tends to make your makeup look a little bit more natural. It kind of looks a little bit more unified, if that makes sense. I also like it because if I am doing a bunch of stuff from here up on my face and I'm not doing anything from here down, then I have an entire strip of my face that's just going to be pale and weird. So you don't want to have all of the color focused on this little porthole area. You want to have the color kind of evenly dispersed and balanced. Now we're moving on to lips, and we are going to line the lips and put on lipstick. So I'm using a lipstick that is kind of a My Lips But Better. It's a little bit of a pink beige. And then I'm using a lip liner that is kind of that same tone, but it's a little bit cooler and a tiny bit darker than the lipstick that I'm using. And the reason why you want to do that is because that creates this natural contour effect. When you outline the outside of your lips with just a little bit of a more cool, shadowy type shade, and then you fill it in with a brighter, warmer shade, it gives this automatic push and pull. And so the part that you put the lipstick on is going to look like it's coming forward. The part that you put the lip liner on is going to look like it's pushing back. And that's going to give us like a very believable, very subtle contour effect to our lips. Just using a lighter, warmer lipstick and a cooler, darker lip liner. So now I'm going to outline my lips. And I like to start on my Cupid's bow. I just draw a little X. And I like to overline my lips just a little bit. So I am using the highlighter that I just put on my lips as a guide. I would go so far as to say you are safe to outline as far as your highlighter goes. That was a tip that I learned from Nikia Joy and Nikki Tutorials. Your lips almost have like 2 different lip lines, and that's really helpful for me when it comes to determining how far I can go for my overlining. Now I am going to do the outside of my lips. I learned from a Jamie French video to make this look quite round. So I have kind of sharp little arches on my Cupid's bow. I am going to make them look a little bit rounder by overlining a little bit on the outside here. I'm just gonna leave it as is. Being an artist really just means knowing when to stop. Okay, now for the lower line, I'm going to overline it a little bit, and I'm going to do that by biting my lip. Lisa Eldridge. Just got just underneath it to make it look a little poutier. Okay, do you see how the edges of my lips are a little bit cooler and darker than the inside? That's kind of what we're going for. You can blend that in at this point, or you can even accentuate it by kind of getting the corners of your lip with your lip liner. So we are going to apply our lipstick. And then we are going to use a Kevyn Aucoin trick and blot and then reapply. So now we are going to set the makeup. I only have one trick for this. Basically, I am going to spray it down, and then I am going to pat my face to get all of those baby hairs to stick to my face rather than sticking out here and having essentially a light hairspray on them. This also helps to get any droplets that your setting spray may have sprayed on your face. And it helps everything kind of like melt together and look a little tiny bit more natural. I learned this tip from Laura Lee and also from Allie Glines. They both use this. Laura says she's patting down her beard. Now it is time to film my eye video. Okay, bye. Alright guys, so I am back and my eyes are did. This is the completed look, and this is the effect that you will get by using all of these makeup tips. I hope that you really enjoyed this, that you got something out of it. Please leave any makeup tips that you use down below for the benefit of the rest of us. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a great day and that we see you again next time. Okay, bye!